Tonight, inching closer.
I believe it was a productive phone call.
The showdown over the debt limit, converging on a hard deadline.
We expect to be unable to pay all of our bills in early June.
And digital dollar.
How would this work? Does it work?
Central banks around the world in the early stages of creating digital currencies. Plus, faith in politics. Our interview with Georgia Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock.
I'm a Matthew 25.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. Debt limit deadline. Good evening in Washington. I'm Jenna Browder. 10 more days. That's how long lawmakers have to raise the nation's $31.4 trillion debt limit or default on its bills. Talks between Republican and Democratic negotiators have stalled in recent days. But after a meeting today between President Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, there's hope a deal could happen. Caitlin Burke joins us with the latest. Caitlin, what are some of the consequences of a U.S. debt default?
Jenna, there would be pretty serious consequences. The U.S. government would be forced to stop all Social Security and Medicare payments, and checks would also be delayed for government workers and the military. There's concern a U.S. default could affect the stock market, even spark a global recession. President Biden stressed over the weekend that both sides need to be willing to make concessions for a deal to be reached.
It's time for Republicans to accept that there is no bipartisan deal to be made solely on their partisan terms.
Republicans say they've been trying to negotiate since February. Speaker McCarthy today pointing to the fact that for 97 days, President Biden refused to come to the table.
Why are we here? Why are we at this last moment in time, too? Two main reasons. The president ignoring the problem, refusing to meet. But secondly, ever since the Democrats took over with the president, they have spent too much money, $6 trillion almost. Each year, discretionary, year after year, we spent almost $40 billion extra dollars. And it's very hard to get them off that spending spree that they're addicted to.
Some spending cuts Republicans have pitched include reclaiming unspent COVID funds and imposing stricter work requirements for certain federal aid programs like food stamps and immigration provisions. The White House has agreed to some cuts, but also proposed tax increases on large businesses and wealthy Americans. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says the debt ceiling must be raised by June 1st to avoid default. And that's a deadline that cannot be negotiated. Jenna?
All right, Caitlin Burke, thank you very much. Well, to election 2024, tonight it's official. Tim Scott is running for the White House. The South Carolina senator announced his bid today, highlighting his own faith in God and faith in America. The Republican from the Palmetto State pointed to a life of hardship and adversity growing up in the Jim Crow South. CBN News White House correspondent Abigail Robertson is in North Charleston for Senator Scott's Oval Office announcement.
Well, Jenna, calling himself the candidate the far left fears the most, Senator Tim Scott officially kicked off his presidential campaign here at Charleston Southern University, his alma mater, with a message of freedom, hope, and opportunity for all Americans.
Our nation, our values, and our people are strong, but our president is weak. I will be the president who stops the far left's assault on our religious liberty. I will preserve one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Yes, we will. Yes, we will. We will be the nation where we honor our Creator and respect every innocent life.
Senator Scott was met by a warm and excited crowd here in North Charleston today. And this announcement comes after he's already been traveling around the country for a few months on a Faith in America tour. Currently, Senator Scott is trailing former President Donald Trump in the GOP primary polls pretty substantially. But his campaign believes he's only going to go up from here. And they say financially, they're starting out strong, already having enough funding to keep this race going through the South Carolina primaries. But it's not just Trump that Scott's going to need to defeat in the GOP primary, with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis reportedly making his announcement this Wednesday. Jenna?
All right, Abigail Robertson in South Carolina. Thank you, Abby. And Abigail sat down with Senator Scott following his announcement today. You can catch her CBN News exclusive interview with him tomorrow on the 700 Club and on the CBN News Channel and app. And with that, let's bring in CBN News Chief Political Analyst David Brody. So, David, we knew Senator Scott would be running. He's been on that campaign and making the rounds. But what do you make of his official candidacy?
Well, he's just overall extremely impressive. And, oh, by the way, he's a nice guy. Even Donald Trump saying nice things about Senator Tim Scott today, which tells you everything you need to know about Tim Scott. Look, I've known Tim Scott for about 14 years or so, ever since he was Mr. Tea Party in 2010, did a really good profile for the 700 Club about his testimony and about everything that Abby's going to explain in the piece on 700 Club tomorrow. But beyond all of that, he finds himself in lane number 3. And what I mean by that is Donald Trump has his lane, Ron DeSantis will have his lane, and then there's the Nikki Haley and Mike Pence when he gets in, Tim Scott, Asa Hutchinson, Vivek Ramaswamy. That's that third lane. I think ultimately there'll be 3 people standing in the end. It'll be Trump, DeSantis, and who in that third lane will be there. I think that's what's going to happen ultimately after Iowa and after New Hampshire.
As you mentioned, as Abby mentioned, Senator Scott has a very compelling story to tell. And of course, faith is a big part of that. David, how significant is that?
Well, it's everything to him. As a matter of fact, that was a big part of the profile. You know, he started to hear about Jesus during, believe it or not, some mentor sessions at Chick-fil-A. Of course it was Chick-fil-A. How could it not be Chick-fil-A? Is that the perfect evangelical story? But beyond that, look, he was failing high school. He had 4 Fs. He was wayward. He grew up in a poor household. He's got a great story. And then he gave his life to Jesus Christ and everything changed around. So God, he leads with God. There's no doubt about that. But I think policy-wise, I think you're going to hear a lot of talk from him about the economy and how he can, in essence, help in that regard because he's been a leader on tax reform, Jenna.
Yeah, David, do you think the economy will be the biggest issue this time around?
Well, it typically is, though I think this time around, I think the culture actually is going to potentially not supersede it, but be right there with it. And what I mean by that is, here we go, right, with all of the school board stuff and the transgender bathrooms and, what is a woman, what is a man, all of that. I think that will be a big part of this campaign as well. And I think Tim Scott is well positioned on those issues.
Yeah. So you mentioned you mentioned Ron DeSantis. He looks to be the number 2 challenger right now behind Donald Trump. For folks, as more folks enter the race, David, there's Mike Pence coming soon, DeSantis coming up here shortly, others possibly entering. Is that more of a challenge for candidates like Trump and DeSantis?
I think it's a challenge more for DeSantis. I think, look, Trump's in his own lane. He's going to do his own thing, and he's leading by a lot. The question is, who's going to be the ultimate challenger that's going to take on Trump mano a mano or mano a womano, depending if it's Nikki Haley. And so therefore, the more people that get in, the better this is for Trump, the worse it is for DeSantis, because in essence, let's think about it, right? DeSantis would love Nikki Haley to not be in the race, for Tim Scott to not be in the race, for Vivek Ramaswamy to not be in the race. He wants it to be a one-on-one matchup with Trump. But with Tim Scott, if he gets traction, if Nikki Haley gets a little traction, even if it's 2%, 4%, 5%, that's going to hurt DeSantis. And we saw this, Jenna, by the way, in 2016. Remember there was talk about how Marco Rubio should endorse Ted Cruz and let Ted Cruz go against Trump. They never did that. Trump went on to the nomination. I wonder if it's going to be something like that this time around.
David, just a few seconds left, but we've seen the former president attacking Ron DeSantis, saying he needs, I think, like a personality transplant. Just a quick thought on that.
Okay, here's my quick thought. There's my quick thought. No, my thought on that is it's typical Trump, but there is a hint of truth to it, which is Ron DeSantis is not the most likable guy in the world. Don't take my word for it. Talk to the donors who aren't quite sure if they want to pony up and give the money. We'll see. It's a problem for DeSantis. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better.
All right, David, we'll leave it there. Always good to see you. Thanks, David.
You too. All right, Jenna.
countries around the world moving towards digital currencies. Coming up, as the U.S. explores that option, privacy advocates warn a digital dollar could spell disaster. Overseas tonight, Russia is claiming victory in a bloody battle in eastern Ukraine, even as Kyiv denies that Bakhmut has fallen. Russian troops raising this flag over a ruined rooftop are claiming full control of the 400-year-old city. The 9-month battle is the longest fight in Russia's war on Ukraine, but Ukrainian President Zelensky insists the small city is not occupied by Russian forces. Meanwhile, Ukrainian troops are preparing for a spring offensive, with President Biden promising more ammo and weapons this weekend at the G7 summit.
We're going to continue to provide economic, humanitarian, and security assistance to Ukraine so it can stand strong as long as it needs it.
And back here in the States, could we be on the brink of a digital dollar? The reality of digital currency is gaining more traction as more and more central banks around the world are in the early stages of creating digital currencies. The U.S. Federal Reserve is as well. But opponents of a digital dollar warn it would be a privacy nightmare. CBN's Dale Hurd has that story.
Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell told the House Financial Services Committee in March that the Fed had already begun testing a digital dollar.
So what we're doing is experimenting in kind of early stage experimentation. How would this work? Does it work? What's the best technology? What's the most efficient?
Just like paper dollars, a central bank digital currency, or CBDC, would be issued by the Federal Reserve. Those pushing for it say it would have several advantages over physical money. They say it could be used to fight inflation because the Fed would have more direct control over the money supply. It could speed up transaction payments and help fight money laundering.
The ability to track transactions has a couple of elements that are very attractive to economic policymakers. One is to know where people are spending their money. Another is to track taxes and prevent evasion and that sort of thing.
Backers say the U.S. needs a digital dollar if it wants to remain the world's reserve currency. Opponents warn that it could be a very effective instrument of government control. Physical money has been called one of the last bastions of privacy. Laws like the Bank Secrecy Act have already stripped away most of the privacy from bank accounts and financial transactions.
Banks have really a ton of power that people don't realize to shut down accounts, to freeze accounts, and to end up holding them for really any number of reasons.
Currency expert James Rickards says a digital currency would move America closer to a totalitarian state.
If I buy anything, the government doesn't know it. MasterCard kind of knows it, but even MasterCard uses product codes. So they don't say, Jim bought a Snickers. It says Jim bought miscellaneous merchandise at a retail place. So the government doesn't know what you're doing. But with this new central bank digital currency, they will, because they maintain the ledger. So if I buy, Ron DeSantis' new book, or I go to a Donald Trump rally, or whatever it may be, the government, using artificial intelligence and having that information, which they would, are able to profile you. They say, well, this guy kind of looks like a conservative and maybe he's MAGA. And then you've got a target on your back.
Last year, a Canadian court froze millions of dollars raised for truckers blocking roads to protest COVID-19 vaccine mandates. When the Pakistani government was faced with almost non-stop protest last year, it threatened to switch off the bank accounts of the protesters. A digital dollar could not only be switched off, the Fed would be able to force negative interest rates on Americans if it wanted them to spend more, penalizing savers. Digital cash might also be an easy target for hackers. On the bank-to-bank level, a real-time payment system called FedNow is expected to begin in July. It's not a digital currency, but an upgrade to what some call our antiquated banking system.
FedNow service is an instant payments infrastructure that financial institutions can use to clear and settle payments instantly.
Large bank deposits will be expected to clear much faster than they do now. But when it comes to a digital dollar, Fed Chairman Powell has admitted he's not at all confident that Americans want it. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Thank you, Dale. And when we come back, an ordained minister and senator answers questions about how he squares his Christian faith with his pro-choice political stance. Welcome back. Only 5 current members of Congress are ordained ministers, 3 in the House and 2 in the Senate. Georgia Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock still goes back to Atlanta every Sunday to lead his historic church. But some of his views have put him at odds with many Christians. Matt Galka traveled to Georgia to sit down with the senator.
It's Easter Sunday at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. These same pews bore witness to sermons by Martin Luther King Jr. as he led the civil rights movement.
Still to fight on.
The church is close to politics once again, as the senior pastor of Ebenezer is also Georgia's junior senator.
We will certainly be united with him in a resurrection like his.
From the pulpit to the plow fields of rural Georgia, Raphael Warnock is attempting to balance his first full term in the Senate.
Someone might ask, why would a preacher get involved in something as messy as politics? I'm a patriot. I love America. Only in America is my story possible. You're looking at a kid who grew up in public housing. I serve in the United States Senate.
Warnock is battle-tested. His recent re-election victory over opponent Herschel Walker needed a special runoff election to decide the outcome. It was the second time Warnock won under the circumstances in the past 2 election cycles. He won a special election in 2020 to become Georgia's first black senator and the first Democrat elected to represent the state in the Senate in 20 years. While the political victories raised his profile, government wasn't always part of the plan.
I'm a Matthew 25 Christian. You know, inasmuch as you've done it unto the least of these, you've done it unto me. When you feed the hungry, when you clothe those who are naked, when you visit those who are sick and in prison. And so that's the work that I've tried to do as a pastor. And what I found out is that over time, my ministry at Ebenezer Baptist Church took me into the public square.
Warnock says his faith drives him when advocating for things like racial justice, reducing gun violence.
As a pastor, I'm praying for those who are affected by this tragedy, but I hasten to say that thoughts and prayers are not enough.
And expanding health care. He helped get the price of insulin capped at $35 for Medicare recipients as part of the Inflation Reduction Act passed last year. He's now trying to extend that to people with private insurance. Warnock and Oklahoma Republican Senator James Lankford are the Senate's only 2 ordained ministers. While scriptures they both read are from the same book, the partisan divides remain on a variety of topics, none more evident than the issue of abortion. Lankford is outspokenly pro-life, while Warnock labels himself as a pro-choice pastor.
You have not been shy about saying you're a pro-choice pastor. You know, to some Christians out there at least, they're probably sitting at home and saying, well, this guy's not a real Christian then.
I mean, my faith is so basic to who I am. I don't feel a need to defend my Christian identity. I'm a man of faith. I love the Lord with all my heart, my soul, my mind, and my strength. And Christians have a whole range of differences on a whole range of issues. And for me, the acid test of your faith is the depth of your commitment to the most marginalized members of the human family.
Do you find it hard as a pastor to find a biblical defense for being pro-choice?
Oh, my stance as a pro-choice pastor is not in spite of my Christian identity, it's because of my Christian identity. I believe in human agency and I believe in choice. Look, I have a deep reverence for life, profound reverence for life, and I have a respect for choice.
To Warnock, having the freedom to choose also means the government should be supporting women and families faced with difficult decisions on unplanned pregnancies. He sponsored a bill with Senator Marco Rubio aimed at improving maternal mortality rates. He's advocated for expanding the child tax credit that aids low-income families.
Senator Rubio and I don't agree on the reproductive choice question. But if the issue is life, what we both recognize is that this country's maternal mortality rate is criminally high. And it's something we can actually do something about.
If a member of your congregation came up to you and said, well, Pastor, Senator, I like you a lot. I like what you have to say. But Psalm 139:16, I knew you before you were born. I just can't get with you on that pro-choice, pro-life debate.
The question is, whose choice is it? And I still believe that a patient's room is too small and cramped a space for a woman, her doctor, and the United States government. And I think as we're seeing this debate play out right now, there is diversity on that point, even inside of the evangelical Christian community.
Warnock has proven so far his brand of sermons and service can win in a new political battleground in Georgia. It's not too early for pundits to toss his name around when talking about future presidential candidates, but it is too early for him to consider it right now.
So a pastor is in the Senate. Could a pastor be in the White House?
I think so. Look, we need all kinds of people serving in all kinds of places. But right now, I'm focused on serving the people of Georgia, and I still, every few days, pinch myself. I can't believe I get to do this work. And I'm looking forward to serving the people of Georgia for a long time.
In Atlanta, Georgia, Matt Galka, CBN News.
Thank you, Matt. And still ahead, the latest crew to make history in space. Finally tonight, a SpaceX rocket successfully delivered a crew of 4 astronauts to the International Space Station this morning. The private flight, carrying a former NASA astronaut and 3 paying customers, launched from Kennedy Space Center in Florida last night. 16 hours later, the Crew Dragon capsule named Freedom arrived at the International Space Station for a week-long stay. It's the second ever private mission to the International Space Station and the first private space mission with a female commander. The mission, called AX-2, is also making history for carrying the first woman from Saudi Arabia to space. Beautiful images and neat to see. And that's going to do it for Faith Nation this evening. Thank you so much for joining us and starting your week with us. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Have a great evening.